Today we talk about aliens. This show is for everyone working at the coalface. Digital, business, marketing, social. This is At the Coalface with your host, Jason Greenwood. Hello everyone, I'm Jason Greenwood. Welcome to episode 23 of At the Coalface. Today I want to talk about your relationship with your web developers and how to improve the relationship or get the best out of the relationship that you have with your web developers. And if you've ever worked on a web project before, whether it be because you've hired a development agency or a developer to work with you, or whether it be that you work for an agency or you work in the space and you've needed to hire developers to work directly for you on projects, or whether you've hired freelancers, whatever the case may be, many of you out there will have had experience working with web developers, or maybe you're looking to embark on your first experience of working with web developers and want to get the best out of that relationship, because it will make or break, or can make or break your web project. So obviously having the best relationship possible and managing that well will benefit you throughout the life of the project and any project that you do thereafter. So one of the first things that I would say about web developers is that they are aliens in some respects. In fact, I had a developer tell me that and use that term for other developers, that they're not like your normal average human being. They are like aliens, and that probably alludes a little bit to the kind of typical personality that you bump into in web developer land, as well as kind of the way that they behave and the way that they interact with each other and the way that they interact with non-developers. So the way I like to think of developers is much like a chef. Chefs or cooks. If you've ever worked in a restaurant, or you know anything about chefs, they really have their own way of doing things. They've got their own personality, they've got very much their own drive, their own motivations, and certainly they can be prima donnas in some respects, because they know that they're so critical to the business and to the restaurant that basically if they walk out, everybody's in trouble. And so they tend to throw their weight around a little bit, and I suppose to a degree web developers are the same. They know that they're absolutely critical to the project or ongoing work, whatever the case may be, and as a result of that, sometimes they can be challenging in their own way to deal with, just like we all can. So what I want to do is I want to maximize your opportunity for success, or help you maximize your opportunity for success of working with developers, and help you sort of understand how they think and how they operate. One of the first things is that they very much respect each other, and if they respect you, certainly they'll perform better. And I guess that's true of any employee or any person that you work with in any way on any project. Certainly if they respect you, typically because you respected them first, or shown them respect first and appreciation first, then you'll have a better working relationship with them. And that's true of developers as well. One of the key differences with developers, however, is the fact that oftentimes they're not customer facing. So they'll be interfacing with project managers, they'll be interfacing with bosses, maybe some development management team leaders, etc. But they often will not be interfacing directly with the customer. And as a result of that, they're kind of at arm's length. And so they don't always understand. Some developers do, but it is a rarity. Some developers don't understand there's a real disconnect between the work that they're doing and the impact both on the end customer who has to use that website, that mobile app, whatever the case may be, whatever project they're working on. So the end consumer, as well as the customer who's paying for that web development project, they oftentimes don't have a lot to do with them either. And as a result of that, they kind of they work in a bubble a little bit, and they're somewhat isolated. And because they live in this bubble that is somewhat isolated from non-developers, they sometimes they're not in touch with, I guess, the ramifications of what they're doing, and that can lead to some negative consequences. Maybe their attention to detail sometimes is very high, but then sometimes it's not. They're subject to the daily life just like we are, but it's just the ramifications of what they do oftentimes can have dramatic impacts on the front end experience for the customer, and for the for the end customer that actually use what they've developed. So one of the things is that they're typically very intelligent. Developers, developing is hard. Writing code, whether it be back-end code and logic, whether it be front-end code, whether it be system administration, whether it be DevOps, whatever sort of level of developer. Oftentimes people will lump all developers into one bucket, and they're not. They definitely have differentiation. They definitely have skill sets. Front-end developers tend to specialize in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Back-end developers tend to focus on PHP or other functional code that goes on in the background, and logic in the back end, whether it be Java or one of the other, Ruby or whatever other back-end language, logic language that they're using. And as a result of that, they're very intelligent. They're specialized. They undertake a lot of training to get where they are. If they're working out in the industry, then they typically have a few years of experience under their belt. They aren't always paid fantastically well, but certainly it's a recognized and a respected profession. So I think it's important, first of all, that you respect your developers, because they, as I said, they will make or break your project. Going beyond that, oftentimes developers will be put under tremendous pressure in terms of time. So they'll be given extremely tight deadlines for doing a piece of work or finishing a project or finishing a phase of a project, and as a result of that, they're working under tremendous pressure. And I think it's worthy for everybody to understand that when anyone is working under pressure, but especially developers, mistakes can creep in, the pressure builds up, and therefore their interactions with other people can be a bit strained as a result, because they're often asked to do the what seems like the unachievable, and people think they can just conjure things up, and it's not. There's a big thought process that goes along with both speccing the project initially, and then as well as delivering it and working within project management systems. So that's the first thing, is respect the developer, understand that they work under tremendous tight deadlines, and as a result of that, sometimes they don't have the chance to do even the peer-reviewed QA, quality assurance, on the code that they would like to do, because they have to move on to the next thing. So unless the developers that you're working with, or the agency that you're working with, or if they are on your internal team, unless you have a quality assurance team that's dedicated to testing the end results of whatever is developed, then you can run into difficulties, and you can run into challenges. Now, also, having come from the agency side, I realized that a lot of clients, they don't want to pay for a tremendous amount of quality assurance time. And quality assurance is purely testing, both functional, UI, which is user interface, and UX, user experience, testing. There's all different ways to test. There's automated testing, there's manual testing, and then there's test methodologies that will help speed the testing process along. And so testing is an industry in its own right, and if you don't have testers on board, and you are expecting your developers to test their own code and test their own functionality, but you don't give them time to do it, then you're gonna run into trouble. And developers typically aren't testers either, so they don't have a particular interest in testing. They don't have a particular interest in trying every little facet of their code, whether it be front end or back end, on all the different devices that need to be tested on. So to get the best value out of your developers and their experience and your interaction with them, it's worth paying that bit extra for a testing resource, a dedicated testing resource. Whether that be paying for one in the agency that you're working with, or if they're working in-house, to definitely establish a test team, or at least a single individual to run your testing for you. If you're the customer and you're hiring an agency to do your development work, then definitely be willing to pay for that QA time, because it will pay you dividends in the end. If the agency you're working with doesn't have a dedicated QA team, or doesn't have a dedicated QA resource, quality assurance resource, to check the code, both to check the code quality as well as the functionality and the front end result of that code, then you just expect that things are going to slip through the cracks. It's not going to be as tested as thoroughly as you would like, and that moves on to that sort of next phase of getting the best out of your developers. So if there is no testing going on, or very limited testing, maybe only the project manager on the agency that you're working with is doing a little bit of testing before they release a piece of work to you to then test further into the quote-unquote UAT phase, which is user acceptance testing. So typically typically, the development lifecycle goes through the three main phases, which is the development phase, the QA phase, and then the UAT phase, and then obviously you rinse and repeat. Obviously, if there are issues found in the code or in the functionality, then that gets sent back to the developers to be fixed, and then it goes through hopefully a QA cycle, and then it goes through a UAT cycle with you as the customer doing the testing, whether that's an in-house resource or once again if you're working with an agency. So if it gets to UAT and it gets to you and you don't have a dedicated resource in-house, and so you're trying to be as efficient with your testing time as possible, but you know you need to do some testing, I want to give you some guidance on how to best do some testing on that work that's been developed before you send it back to the developers. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to either not test at all, and so you're just kind of trusting that the developers have done good work, and everybody makes mistakes. So the reality is mistakes will slip through no matter how fastidious a developer is, or no matter how professional a developer is, mistakes can slip through, and you just have to prepare yourself for that reality. Especially in large projects, it's just impossible that things are made with perfection. And so what I would suggest is as you go about that UAT phase, so that user acceptance testing, and typically work packages are released to you throughout the life cycle of a project, or if a project is already live and you're doing enhancements or upgrades or fixes, then certain work packages or bundles will be released to you in a cyclical fashion for you then to test before you authorize the developers to push that code to live and expose it to the end customer via your website or mobile application. So when you're in the UAT phase, it's best to develop a test regime or a test framework. And what you'll want to do, the first step that you'll want to take is you'll want to dig into your Google Analytics, and you'll want to, or whatever analytics package you're using, and you're going to want to look at the devices that are used across your website, because you definitely want to make sure that you're testing on the real-world devices that your customers are using to access your website. So you're going to typically test on your desktop. You're going to typically test Chrome, Firefox, and Internet Explorer, and then when it comes to mobile devices, because there's so many different break points in responsive web design now, sites reorientate themselves and scale themselves, and the layouts change depending on the device, depending on the resolution of that device, depending on the screen footprint of that device. They'll reorientate themselves what's called responsively to accommodate those devices, unless they've got a dedicated mobile website or a dedicated web app, and only very old websites typically aren't responsive nowadays. And as a result of that, the number of devices that you need to test on, the number of screen sizes you need to test on has exploded, and so that's definitely brought some extra challenges to the testing process. So the first thing you want to do, like I said, is to jump into your analytics package, look at what's being used on your website. Basically, I don't want to make a blanket recommendation, because there's different rules that apply to different verticals and different businesses of how thorough you want your testing to be and across how many devices. But as a rule of thumb, if a device accounts for 10% or more of your traffic, you're probably going to want to include that particular device in your testing. Anything below about 10% you can obviously test all the rats and mice devices that are generating 1, 2, 3% of your traffic, but there's a diminishing return on your investment of testing below about that 10% mark. Some businesses will set the threshold as high as 20%, but I would say that basically anywhere between 10 and 20%, if your traffic is coming from a device, you probably want to test on it. Now, once again, once you've done that and you've identified the devices that you want to test on, and you've made a bit of a table of those tests, then you're going to want to probably use a testing tool that will help ease your testing. If you're doing all manual testing, you're still going to want a tool. There's a tool called BrowserStack, and I'll put the link underneath this video to the website for BrowserStack. And what BrowserStack is it's a web browser-based testing tool that allows you to test all sorts of different devices and resolutions and orientations, whether it be portrait or landscape on mobile devices. Allows you to test them all within the browser in a device environment, a virtual device environment. So BrowserStack allows you to easily, quickly, seamlessly switch between devices all in the one browser, and you get to see and experience what that device would experience if you were testing it in real life on that device and holding it in your hand, etc. So that can certainly ease the process of testing. And so you'll want to go through and you'll want to test all of those devices. Most businesses will have anywhere from 15 to 20 test environments that they'll need to test the front-end experience of the newly developed code, newly developed functionality on, and you'll want to test it across all those devices. So go through the workflow, go through all the pieces of new functionality or enhanced or fixed functionality, and test them on all those devices systematically, one by one. It's fantastic to create a checklist. You can create a shared Google Doc or something like that, and you can share it with your internal team, and then you can create a table with all the devices and then a tick list for staging and production. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to just go down the tick list. Yes, we've tested on all these devices this piece of functionality, and then once you have tested and you hand that back to your developers to push that code live into a production environment, then you want to run that same series of tests again, because there can be version control challenges, there can be problems that sneak through in that version control, whatever version control system, the code version control system that your developers are using. Sometimes all that code that you've tested in your staging or development environment doesn't get pushed seamlessly through to the live production environment, or there can be some unique conflicts in the production environment that you didn't anticipate. And so you always have to test again once that code is actually deployed to live, and once again just go through that tick list. So by taking that responsibility and that onus on yourself as the business owner, or as your web team manager, or whatever role you play, if you've got a responsibility for making sure that the code that is ultimately deployed on your website or your mobile app works the way that you expect it to work, if you're responsible for that in any way, whether you're an e-commerce manager or whatever, then you definitely want to put a testing framework into place. I'll also tell you and make a couple of other recommendations. You'll probably want to make any major code change, any significant user interface change that is pushed live. The day that gets pushed live, you'll want to annotate that in Google Analytics. So all analytics packages have an annotation system that ties a specific note to a specific date, so that if anything happens in that user experience that is negative or positive, either way, you can track that back to a specific deployment. And so that way, if there is an issue, then you can tie that back to a specific date and a specific code deployment. So hopefully you can get that resolved very quickly if there is an issue that arises. So you're going to want to do that, and then you're going to want to notify your internal team as well. So once code is deployed, once it's tested, once it's annotated in Google Analytics, you're going to want to send an email. You're going to want to have some method of notifying your internal team that this new piece of functionality or fixed piece of functionality is live and what it is and what was changed, just so that everybody's kept in the loop. So you're probably going to want to let your customer service team know. You're going to probably want to let your IT team know. You're going to let your marketing team know. You're going to want to let whoever has anything to do basically with your web experience or your mobile application experience and is going to be impacted by that experience, then you're going to want to let them know so that they are very, very aware of what's happening within the business. So this will generate a large amount of respect with your developers, and will show your developers that you respect them. If you do find issues with their code in the staging environment or production for that matter, definitely be respectful when you go back and you let them know through their ticketing system, or however it is that you know, whether it be email, however it is that you let developers know that something either hasn't been done correctly, or whether you want something new done to that in the form of a change request or something else, then by all means be respectful of them, be respectful of the power that they wield in allowing you to craft the kind of experiences, the customer journeys that you're trying to craft. So be respectful. And understand that they do work under a tremendous amount of pressure. So hopefully this has been useful to you. I've worked with developers for over 15 years now. I've hired a lot of them, both internally as well as through agencies that I've worked with. Brought agencies on board. I've worked with developers from many different countries. I've worked with developers from India. I've worked with developers from China. I've worked with developers from Vietnam. I've worked with developers from New Zealand. I've worked with developers from Russia. So I've worked with developers from all over the world, and they all have their own unique ways of working. But certainly if you expose them to the project early, if you get their feedback early, if you get them heavily involved in the speccing and scoping process so they've got some buy-in there, and then you respect what they do, you respect the fact that they oftentimes don't have a lot of customer-facing experience, and so therefore they sometimes have challenges communicating with you as the customer or with your customers in the agency environment. So you know they're not always the best communicators verbally, and so you know they interface with code, they interface with computers, they don't often interface with people. So be sensitive to that. You know, stick your project managers, stick your account managers, stick other people as the interface that can translate what the developers are saying and what you are saying and what your customers are saying. It's always best to have an interface, someone standing in the middle, standing in the gap between those two that can translate the language of all those parties and be that go-between. It just makes the process much smoother, it makes it much easier, it makes it easier for them, and it makes it easier for you. So hopefully those things are going to help you maximize the output and the experience you have with your developers. And yeah, if you've got any questions, feel free to let me know, and I'll do my best to help you and point you in the right direction.